Hey everybody, and welcome back for another deep dive with us. Today we're going to be looking into the case of Carrie Stainer, and we're going to be basing it on an episode of the true crime podcast Case File.
Yeah, this is a case that really sticks with you. It happened in 1999 in Yosemite National Park, and it really kind of shook the FBI and how they do investigations. And there's even a connection to the whole Bigfoot thing, which we'll get to, but yeah.
Okay, so we're in Yosemite in 1999. Stainer's working as a maintenance man at this place called Cedar Lodge. Seemingly normal guy, just blending right in, but
Right.
some really bad things are about to happen.
Right, so the first thing that happens is the murder of Joey Armstrong. She was a young naturalist, and she was found decapitated near her cabin. This was in July of 99, and it really just terrified the whole community. I mean, a murder is bad enough, but to be decapitated and they couldn't even find her head initially, it just adds this whole other level of, horror to it.
Right, it's just a really awful detail. And actually, a few months before that, there was the Yosemite Sightseer murders. And that was the disappearance of Curl Sund, her daughter Julie, and their friend Silvina Palazzo. And it's crazy because they disappeared from that same Cedar Lodge where Stainer worked.
Yeah, they didn't suspect him at all at first. I mean, he had access to the entire grounds, and nobody even thought about him.
It's almost unbelievable that he was right there the whole time. And it
Yeah.
seems like the FBI made some mistakes early on in the investigation.
They did. They totally focused on a group of local criminals in Stater. That just sent the whole investigation in the wrong direction.
Yeah, it really shows how tunnel vision and just assuming things can totally mess up an investigation.
Absolutely. And those missteps they made had really awful consequences.
Yeah.
I mean, he was free, and that's what allowed him to kill again. To really understand this case, you have to go way back to his psychology. This wasn't something that just happened overnight. This guy had these dark thoughts and fantasies about hurting women since he was really young.
I think like
Okay.
7 years old, right? And then on top of that, he molested someone and had indecent exposure incidents. You can see this pattern of escalating behavior. And I think he was even questioned about his uncle's death.
Yeah, he was questioned about that, but never charged. And it's that escalation of violence that's so scary. There were a couple times where he almost attacked his girlfriend's daughters. And one time he even thought about attacking some teenage girls in a hot tub. It's just terrifying to think how close he was to doing those things.
Okay, so let's talk about the Yosemite Sightseer murders. Carol, Julie, and Silvina were just on vacation in Yosemite, just trying to enjoy the park, and they had no idea that something so awful was going to happen in their hotel room. Stainer pretended to be a maintenance worker and said there was a leak. That's how he got into their room.
And then he pulled out this backpack. He had rope duct tape, a knife, and a revolver in there. And he used all of that to attack the three women. He strangled Carol first, then Silvina. Julie was actually still alive at that point.
And then he took Julie in their rental car. He drove around with her for a while before taking her to a secluded place and killing her too.
Yeah, and he actually strangled Julie with her face turned away. He said later he couldn't bear to look at her face while he did it.
Okay.
And then he hid her body under this poison oak bush. He had even researched forensic techniques, probably from watching true crime shows, so that he could try and get away with it.
It's really disturbing that he was kind of studying how to commit murder. And it worked for a little while. He burned the car. He sent a fake map to the police to try to lead them to Julie's body. He even went back and cleaned the hotel room to make it seem like they had checked out.
Right, and the FBI was so focused on those other guys, they completely bought it for a while.
Yeah.
And that bought Stainer so much time.
Yeah, I mean, he just went back to work at Cedar Lodge like nothing happened. A total wolf in sheep's clothing.
Right. But eventually the investigation did shift. But it makes you wonder, if they had focused on him sooner, could they have saved Joey's life?
Yeah, it's a really haunting question.
Absolutely. But there's another thing about this case that is just weird. Stainer was obsessed with Bigfoot.
Yeah, we can't forget about that. He claimed he saw Bigfoot near Cedar Lodge and Parr. He would go out into the woods all the time to try and find it again.
It is so strange. And it just makes you think what was going on in his mind. Some people think that for people like him with violent urges, obsessions like that can be a way to separate themselves from reality, to create this fantasy world where their actions make sense.
So maybe his obsession with Bigfoot was a way to help him deal with what he was doing, to convince himself that he wasn't a cold-blooded killer.
Yeah, it's possible. And his obsession might have even helped him commit the murders and get away with them for a while. I mean, he knew those woods so well. And those secluded places where he was looking for Bigfoot were also the perfect places to hide a body.
That's a scary thought. But it's even weirder how he got caught.
Oh, yeah. He was found swimming naked in the Merced River by FBI agents who had come back to the Cedar Lodge to ask him some more questions.
Okay, so what made them go back to him?
Well, they'd searched his apartment after their first interview, but they didn't find anything really incriminating. But he was really weird about his backpack. So they got a warrant, and when they finally got it open, they found some disturbing things. Duct tape, a revolver, a knife, and a true crime novel with graphic descriptions of violence against women.
Oh, wow, a true crime novel. I wonder if he was using that to learn how to kill and get away with it.
It wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah.
But even with all that, it wasn't enough to arrest him.
So what happened?
Well, he didn't show up for work the next day, so they knew he was on the run.
And they found him where?
Get ready for this. They found him at a nude resort called Laguna Duel.
Wow. Can't make this stuff up. What was he like when they caught him?
He was really calm, almost like he didn't understand what was happening. But then once he was in custody, things got even weirder.
What do you mean?
He wouldn't confess unless they gave him child pornography.
That's really disturbing. What did the FBI do?
Well, obviously they weren't going to do that, so they pretended to be working on it, just to keep him talking.
Did it work?
It did. Eventually he confessed to killing Joey Armstrong and the Yosemite Sightseers. He gave them really detailed accounts of everything.
And I read somewhere that he asked to see pictures of little girls during his confession. Just really messed up. And the way he acted during the whole investigation is crazy too. He was so calm and collected, and he even tried to sell his story to make money off of it.
Yeah, it's just chilling. It shows how dark he really was.
Yeah.
You have to wonder if there was any connection to his brother Stephen. I mean, Stephen was kidnapped and held captive for 7 years when he was a kid. And when he finally escaped, he became a bit of a celebrity.
Do you think maybe Carrie was jealous of that? Wanted that same kind of attention?
Yeah, maybe. It's an interesting thought.
Yeah, the Stainer brothers story is just really complicated. To figure out Carrie's motives, we need to look at his trial.
All right, so what happened at the trial?
Well, he pleaded not guilty at first for the Yosemite Sightseer murders. Then he changed it to not guilty by reason of insanity. His lawyer said he was mentally ill and pointed to his family history of mental illness and his Bigfoot obsession. So they were saying that he couldn't tell right from wrong.
Right, but the prosecution said no. He knew exactly what he was doing. They said his planning and how he covered everything up proved it.
So what did the jury say?
They said he was guilty. And he was sentenced to death. He's actually still on death row at San Quentin. But California isn't doing executions right now.
And the families of the victims filed lawsuits against Cedar Lodge, right?
Yeah, they said that the security there wasn't good enough. And that's what allowed Stainer to kill those women.
What about the community and the FBI? How did they react?
Well, it really changed the community. It made Yosemite feel unsafe for a lot of people. And the FBI faced a lot of criticism for how they handled the investigation. They got a lot of heat for focusing on the wrong guys for so long.
Yeah, it's a really sad reminder that even in places that seem safe, bad things can happen.
It is. And sometimes the people who seem the most normal can be hiding the worst secrets.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground here today, but there are still a lot of questions. And we're going to try and answer some of them in part 2 of our deep dive into the story of Carrie Stainer. Welcome back, everyone. We're continuing our deep dive into the Carrie Stainer case. Last time we talked about his conviction and the impact of his crimes, but now we want to get into his head a little bit. Like, what would make someone do something so awful?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? I mean, we know about his past, the disturbing thoughts as a kid, the molestation, the indecent exposure. But did those things really cause him to become a killer? Or is it more complicated than that?
It's something that experts still argue about, right? Like how much of it is childhood trauma versus other factors. Stainer's case really makes you think about all of that.
Totally. And then there's his brother Stephen. You have to wonder if that played a role. I mean, Stephen was abducted, and then he came back after 7 years and was kind of a big deal. Did Carrie feel like he was living in Stephen's shadow? Did he want that same attention even if it meant doing terrible things?
That's a really interesting theory. We know Carrie was really affected by Stephen's disappearance and then his return, and he was even angry about how the guy who took Stephen was sentenced. Like, he thought it wasn't harsh enough, so maybe he felt like the world was unfair to him and his family. Maybe he wanted revenge, or like you said, maybe he wanted attention.
And look at who he targeted. Women alone or in vulnerable situations. He often pretended to be someone in authority to gain their trust.
Right, like with the Yosemite Sightseers, he pretended to be a maintenance man to get into their room.
Yeah.
It's scary how predators use positions of authority like that.
It really is. It makes you think about being aware of your surroundings and trusting your gut.
And what about that Bigfoot thing? That's just so weird. Was it just a coincidence or was it more than that?
It's the question that keeps coming up. Was it a delusion? Or some experts think he might have used the Bigfoot thing to compartmentalize his crimes, like a way to create this fantasy world to escape what he was really doing.
No, he's telling himself he's on this quest instead of being a killer.
Maybe. And that obsession might have actually helped him. I mean, he knew those woods so well because he was always looking for Bigfoot. And those remote places were also good places to hide bodies.
That's a chilling thought. And he was so meticulous about everything, cleaning the crime scenes, misleading investigators, even using things he learned from true crime shows.
Right, he wasn't impulsive. He was
Yeah.
very calculated. It's really disturbing. It makes you wonder if there were any chances to stop him before he killed more people.
Well, the FBI focusing on the wrong guys at first definitely gave him more time. And remember those times he almost attacked his girlfriend's daughters and those girls at the hot tub? What if those had happened? Would they have caught him sooner?
That's a good question. It just shows how important it is to take every report seriously, especially when you see a pattern of behavior like that.
Absolutely. It's a reminder to be vigilant and to trust your gut.
For sure. And Stainer's case also showed some problems with security in the hospitality industry. He was able to use his job to get into those women's rooms.
And the lawsuits against Cedar Lodge really highlighted that. It's made hotels and places like that rethink their security measures.
It's a sad reminder that even in beautiful places like Yosemite, you can't always be safe. Evil can be anywhere, and sometimes it looks totally normal. But there's one more piece of this puzzle we need to look at. To really understand Stainer, we have to hear what he said himself. His confessions are really disturbing, but they give us a glimpse into his mind. We'll talk about that in the final part of our deep dive.
Welcome back. So we've talked about Cary Stainer's crimes, the psychology, and now we're going to get into some really unsettling stuff. His actual confessions.
Yeah, it's tough to listen to, but sometimes the killer's own words can tell us things we wouldn't know otherwise.
I mean, it's one thing to talk about what he did, but to hear him describe it,
Right. It's chilling.
it's like he's talking about something totally normal.
Exactly. No emotion, no remorse. Just matter of fact. Like he's describing a trip to the store or something.
And then sometimes he'd try to justify it, blame the victims,
Yeah, say he couldn't control himself. It's classic predator behavior.
shifting the blame,
That's
dehumanizing.
exactly.
And that smile
Oh, God, that smile.
during his confession. I can't get that image out of my head,
It's just so disturbing.
especially when you think about the victims' families, the grief they must have been going through. And he's worried about what people think of him, his legacy,
Right, and he tried to make money off of it, too.
sell his story for a movie.
Sickening, really.
And then there's the sexual motivation that he talked about,
Yeah, the fantasies he described,
the control, the violence.
it's hard to hear.
And he asked to see pictures of little girls.
That's where it gets really dark.
Makes you wonder what else he would have done.
If he hadn't been caught.
The terrifying thought.
And we have to talk about the impact on the community.
And the FBI.
Yosemite, it changed everything.
That sense of safety.
Gone.
And the FBI, they took a lot of heat.
Rightfully so. Focusing on the wrong guys.
That gave Stainer time.
Too much time.
So what can we learn from all this?
That monsters can look like anyone.
Hide in plain sight.
Trust your gut.
If something feels wrong, say something.
Absolutely.
And even in beautiful places, like Yosemite,
Bad things can happen.
be aware.
Be vigilant.
So that's it for our deep dive into the Cary Stainer case. It's a tough one,
It really is.
but hopefully we learned something.
About human nature.
The darkness that's out there,
And in us.
and how important it is to be careful, to look out for each other.
Exactly.
Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time for another deep dive.